He packed while I was sleeping. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because the detail matters. Not the packing. Men pack. Men leave. That is a thing that happens in this world with the regularity of weather, and I am not naive enough to pretend I never saw clouds. But he packed while I was sleeping, while I was 37 weeks pregnant with his daughter, lying on my left side the way the doctor told me to, because the baby was pressing on a vein, and my ankles were swollen, and my back hurt in a place I couldn't reach, and the only comfortable position left in the entire human body was the one I was in, curled on my left, with a pillow between my knees and his side of the bed empty. His side of the bed had been empty a lot. I'd stopped noticing, or I'd stopped letting myself notice, which is different, and which I now understand is a skill women develop during pregnancy the way we develop cravings involuntarily as a survival mechanism, because the alternative is lying awake at 37 weeks, cataloging all the ways the man beside you has already left before his suitcase confirmed it. My name is Tessa Moreno. I was 29 years old. I was a physical therapist at a clinic in Raleigh. I was 8 months pregnant with a girl I had already named Lucia, after my grandmother, who had raised 4 children alone in a house with no air conditioning in Corpus Christi, and who told me once when I was 16 and crying about a boy, "Misha, the ones who leave were never holding you. They were leaning." Michael was leaning. I know that now. I knew it then too, if I'm honest. I knew it in the body, the way you know a storm is coming, before the sky changes. Not in the facts. The facts were fine. Michael went to work. Michael came home. Michael painted the nursery a shade of yellow called Duckling that we'd argued about for 20 minutes at Lowe's because he wanted gray and I wanted yellow and I won, which I now understand was not a victory but a concession disguised as one, the kind a man gives when he's already decided he won't be in the room long enough for the color to matter. Michael Hale, 33. Software engineer, tall, thin, the kind of handsome that photographs well and hugs poorly, all angles, no warmth, the architecture of a man whose body was designed for looking at rather than leaning into. I loved him. I want that on the record. I loved him the way you love your first real adult thing, with commitment, with furniture, with a shared Netflix password, and a joint checking account, and a registry at Target that included a breast pump and a car seat, and the particular optimism of 2 people who believe that a baby will make the cracks in a foundation disappear instead of widening them. The cracks had been there since the 2nd trimester. That's when the sex stopped and the distance started. Not dramatically, not with fights or slammed doors, but with the slow, quiet withdrawal of a man who is looking at his pregnant wife and seeing something he didn't order. He stopped touching my belly. He stopped coming to appointments. He stopped saying our baby and started saying the baby, which is a shift so small that most people wouldn't hear it, but I heard it because I was a physical therapist and I was trained to notice when a body starts compensating for a thing it can no longer bear. 3 weeks before my due date, I woke up at 6 a.m. The bed was empty. Not unusual. Michael left for work at 6:30, and sometimes he was already in the kitchen. I rolled over slowly the way you roll when you're carrying 30 extra pounds of life in your midsection, and I reached for my phone to check the time, and I saw the note. It was on his pillow, handwritten, which meant he'd thought about it, which meant it wasn't impulsive, which meant the man I loved had sat down at some point. Maybe the kitchen table, maybe the car, maybe a coffee shop, where he pretended to be a person who wasn't about to abandon his pregnant wife, and had chosen words and put them on paper and folded the paper and placed it on a pillow that still had the imprint of his head. The note said, "Tessa, I can't do this. I know that makes me the worst person you've ever met, and you're probably right. I'm not ready to be a father. I thought I was. I wanted to be. But I wake up every morning and I look at the nursery and I feel like I'm drowning and I can't drown and be a good parent at the same time. I need to figure out who I am before I can be who she needs. I'm sorry. I'll call when I'm ready." I read it twice. I set it down. I picked it up. I read it again. Then I set it on the nightstand next to the glass of water and the prenatal vitamins and the copy of What to Expect that had a bookmark at week 37. And I lay there on my left side with my hand on my belly and I felt Lucia kick hard. The kind of kick that meant she was awake, the kind that I used to laugh about, and Michael used to put his hand on and say, "She's got your temper," and I stared at the ceiling and I waited to cry. I didn't cry. I waited for it, the way you wait for a bus that's supposed to arrive, with patience, with expectation, with the understanding that it will come because it always comes. But it didn't. What came instead was something colder, something closer to arithmetic than emotion, a list. Not of grief, but of logistics. I had 3 weeks until my due date. I had a baby who needed to be born. I had no partner, no birth plan that didn't include Michael, no second name on the emergency contact form at the hospital. I had a nursery painted duckling that would now be entered by one parent instead of two. I had a car seat installed in the back of a car I'd have to drive myself. I had a breast pump still in the box. I had a life that had been designed for two and had just been rezoned for one, and the rezoning had happened overnight on a pillow in handwriting I recognized. I called my mother, not because I needed to cry. I still couldn't, but because my mother was the kind of woman who, upon hearing that her pregnant daughter had been abandoned, would not offer sympathy. She would offer a plan. "He's gone," I said. Silence. 1 second. 2. My mother processing information the way she processed everything completely without waste, arriving at the correct response the way a GPS arrives, at a route, by eliminating every wrong one first. "Are you safe?" she said. "Yes." "Is the baby safe?" "Yes." "Good, I'm coming. Don't move. Don't call him. Don't text him. Don't do anything except drink water and stay on your left side. I'll be there in 4 hours. "Mom, you're in Corpus Christi. That's a flight." "I know what it is. I'll be there in 4 hours. She was there in 3.5. She walked through my front door with one suitcase, one carry-on, and the particular energy of a woman who has raised 4 children and buried a husband and survived a world that never once asked her permission. And she looked at the note on the nightstand and she picked it up and she read it and she set it down and she said, "Duckling is a beautiful color." And then she made me breakfast. And she didn't mention Michael's name for the rest of the day, because my mother understood something that Michael never had, that a woman 3 weeks from giving birth does not need explanations or apologies or the carefully worded guilt of a man who is drowning. She needs eggs. She needs someone to fold the laundry. She needs a person in the house who will be there tomorrow and the day after that, and the day after that. That night, lying in bed, I heard her on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was low but not quiet. My mother had never learned the frequency of secrecy because my mother had never had anything to hide. "She's fine," she said. To someone. "The baby's fine. But I need you here. All of you. She's going to need a room full of people. And she's going to get one." I didn't know who she was calling. I didn't know how many calls she made that night, or the next night, or the next. I found out 3 weeks later in a delivery room at WakeMed Hospital when the door opened and the room filled and the people who walked in were not the person who had left, but the people who had never once considered leaving. But that was 3 weeks away. And for now there was breakfast, and my mother's suitcase in the hallway, and a note on a pillow that I folded once and put in a drawer I would not open again. They arrived one by one, then 2 by 2, then in groups that didn't fit through the door at the same time. My mother, it turned out, had called everyone. Not everyone in the way people say everyone when they mean a few. Everyone in the way a woman from Corpus Christi means it, which is every human being she has ever fed, prayed for, argued with, forgiven, or shared a hospital waiting room with in 61 years of being alive on this earth. The first to arrive was my sister Nina. She lived in Houston, which is closer to Corpus Christi than to Raleigh, which meant my mother had called her before she'd called the airline. Nina walked through the door on Tuesday morning with 2 suitcases, a bag of tamales from Tia Rosa's kitchen, and the particular fury of a younger sister who has just learned that her older sister's husband has left and who is vibrating at a frequency that, in another era, would have been classified as a weapon. "Where is he?" she said. "Not to me. To the house. To the universe. To the concept of Michael." "Gone," I said. "I know he's gone. Where did he go?" "I don't know. And I don't care." "You should care. I need an address. I need coordinates. I need—"
Nina.
My mother's voice, from the kitchen. One word. The word that had stopped every argument, every tantrum, every ill-conceived plan in the Moreno family for 30 years. "Sit down. Eat." "We're not doing that." Nina sat. She ate. She didn't mention coordinates again. But she stayed, and she didn't leave. And for the next 3 weeks, she slept on the couch and folded every piece of baby clothing in the house twice, and assembled the stroller that Michael had left unassembled in the garage, with a YouTube tutorial and a vocabulary of Spanish profanity that would have made our grandmother proud. The second to arrive was my best friend, Dara. She lived in Raleigh, 14 minutes away, and she had known about Michael before I called her because my mother had texted her the morning after the note. Dara was a labor and delivery nurse at WakeMed, which was the hospital where I was scheduled to give birth, which meant she had not only personal knowledge but professional jurisdiction. She came over after her shift on Wednesday, still in scrubs, still smelling like antiseptic, and the particular calm that L&D nurses carry with them like a second skin. "I pulled your file," she said. "Your OB is Dr. Kessler. She's the best in the department. I've worked with her on over 200 deliveries. You're in the best hands." "You pulled my file?" "I'm your best friend and your hospital's employee. I pulled your file, I reviewed your birth plan, and I flagged it so that whoever is on shift when you deliver knows that your emergency contact has changed." She paused. "I replaced Michael's name with your mother's. And mine." I stared at her. "You can do that?" "I did it. Whether I can is a question for HR, and HR doesn't work on Wednesdays." The third to arrive was my father-in-law. That one I didn't expect. Thomas Hale, Michael's father, 70 years old, retired postal carrier, widowed, quiet in a way that was nothing like his son's quiet. Michael's quiet was retreat. Thomas's quiet was architecture, the quiet of a man who has spent 40 years delivering other people's mail and has learned that most things arrive on their own schedule, and there's no point rushing them. He knocked on the door on Friday afternoon. I opened it, and he stood on my porch with a brown paper bag and a face that carried the particular weight of a man who has just learned what his son has done and has driven 6 hours from Wilmington to stand on a porch and not know what to say. "I brought you peaches," he said, "from the stand on Route 17. You said once you liked them." I had said that once, at Thanksgiving 2 years ago, in a conversation he'd been part of for 30 seconds before Michael changed the subject. He remembered. "Thomas," I said, "you didn't have to come." My son left his pregnant wife. His voice was level, but the level was load-bearing, the kind of level that requires effort. I raised him. Whatever he is, I had a hand in it. And I'm not going to let the thing I had a hand in be the reason you go through this alone. He came in. He put the peaches in a bowl on the counter. He sat at the kitchen table and he drank the coffee my mother made him. And he didn't say much, because Thomas didn't say much, but his presence filled the chair in a way that mattered. The way a foundation matters, invisible but structural, the thing the house stands on, even when no one looks at it. He stayed for 2 weeks. He slept in the guest room. He fixed the dripping faucet in the bathroom that Michael had promised to fix for 6 months. He assembled the crib, the same crib Michael had ordered and left in the box. And when I came into the nursery and saw it standing there, finished, solid in the room painted Duckling, I finally cried. Not for Michael, for his father, who had driven 6 hours with peaches because he remembered a sentence I'd said once at Thanksgiving. The fourth to arrive was my coworker Janelle. She brought a meal train sign-up sheet that already had 14 names on it. "The clinic sends their love," she said, "and Dr. Ramos says your job is held for as long as you need. Full maternity leave, no questions." The fifth was my neighbor Mrs. Pak, who was 74 and who brought a hand-knitted blanket, the color of Duckling, and a small card that said, in careful handwriting, "Every baby deserves a welcome. Here is mine." The sixth was my cousin Adriana, who flew in from Denver and slept on an air mattress in the nursery, and who woke up every morning at 5 to make breakfast because she said that pregnant women should never have to cook, and anyone who disagreed could fight her and her mother's mother, who was also my grandmother, who was also Lucia, who had raised 4 children alone in a house with no air conditioning. By the end of the second week, my house was full. Not full the way houses are full at parties, loud, temporary, performative. Full the way houses are full when people have decided to stay. The refrigerator held casseroles from 6 different women. The nursery had been organized and reorganized by 3 different opinions. The laundry was done before I knew it was dirty. The dripping faucet was fixed. The stroller was assembled. The car seat was checked and rechecked by Dara, who had professional opinions about car seat angles. And my mother moved through all of it, the way she moved through everything. Quietly, efficiently, without performance. She didn't make speeches. She didn't organize group activities. She cooked. She cleaned. She answered the door. She fielded calls from relatives in Texas who wanted to fly out and told them not yet after the baby. She managed the household the way air traffic controllers manage airspace, with calm, with authority, with the absolute certainty that every incoming person would land safely and in the right place. Michael called once, 12 days after he left. My mother answered. I don't know what she said. I was in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair Thomas had brought from his truck, a chair that had been Michael's when he was a baby, a detail so painful in its tenderness that I had to look away when Thomas carried it in. I heard my mother's voice in the kitchen, low, measured, the voice she used when she was not angry, but something worse, something below anger, something that had no name in English but existed in Spanish as a single word. I'd heard her use exactly twice in my life. The call lasted 4 minutes. When she came back, she said nothing. I asked nothing. We sat in the nursery, me in the rocking chair, her on the floor, leaning against the wall beneath the window, and we listened to the house breathe around us, full of people who had come because they were called, and because they were needed, and because they understood something Michael had never learned, that a woman about to bring a life into the world does not need a man who stays out of obligation. She needs a room, a full room, a room with people in it who chose to be there, not because they had to, but because the alternative, not being there, was something they refused to consider. The due date was 1 week away. The room was almost ready. Not the nursery. The nursery had been ready for months. In Duckling, with a crib Michael's father built, and a rocking chair Michael once sat in, and a blanket from a 74-year-old neighbor who believed every baby deserved a welcome. The other room, the one at Wake Med, the one with the monitors and the bed and the fluorescent lights and the door that would open when Lucia decided she was ready. That room was going to be full. My mother had made sure of it. And Michael's chair, the one he'd left empty, would be occupied. Not by him, by the people who never left. Lucy came on a Tuesday. Not the due date, 4 days early, because my daughter, like her grandmother, like her great-grandmother, like every Moreno woman before her, arrived on her own schedule and did not consult anyone about it. I woke up at 2:14 a.m. with a contraction that felt like the earth had grabbed the inside of my body and squeezed, and I lay there in the dark for 10 seconds thinking it was a cramp, and then another one came and I knew. "Mom," I said. Not loudly. I didn't need to be loud. My mother slept with one ear open, the way mothers of pregnant daughters sleep, not really sleeping at all, just resting with her consciousness parked at the curb, engine running. She was in my doorway in 9 seconds. I counted. "It's time," she said.
It's time.
The house woke up the way a ship wakes up when someone sounds the alarm, not with panic, but with purpose. Every person moving to the station they'd been assigned without anyone assigning it. Nina grabbed the hospital bag that had been packed by the door for 2 weeks. Thomas started the car. My mother called Dara, who was not on shift, but who answered on the first ring, because Dara had told me 3 weeks ago that she would sleep with her phone on her chest until Lucia arrived, and she had meant it. "How far apart?" Dara said. 7 minutes, my mother said. "I'll meet you there. Tell her to breathe. Tell her I love her. Tell her the room is ready." The drive to Wake Med took 11 minutes. Thomas drove. My mother sat beside me in the back seat, holding my hand, timing contractions on her phone, with the calm efficiency of a woman who had done this 4 times herself, and who understood that the only useful thing a person can do in a car with a woman in labor is be quiet and be present. Nina sat in the front seat and did not speak, which was the loudest thing Nina had ever not done. We arrived at 2:51 a.m. Dara was already there, standing at the entrance in scrubs, with a wheelchair and a face that was half nurse, half best friend. The two halves working together in a way that should have been a conflict of interest, but was, in fact, the most comforting thing I had ever seen. "I've got you," she said. She took my hand, she wheeled me in, and the doors opened, and the hospital swallowed me the way hospitals do, with fluorescent light and antiseptic, and the particular hum of a building that never sleeps, because the things that happen inside it cannot wait until morning. Dr. Kessler was already there. Dara had called her from the car. She met me in the labor room, a woman in her 50s with steady hands and a voice that sounded like a warm towel feels. And she looked at me and said, "Tessa, I hear your team is here." "My team," I said, between contractions. "Your nurse," she nodded at Dara, "told me you'd be arriving with a full roster." She wasn't wrong. I didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. I was focused on the contractions, which had gone from 7 minutes apart to 4 in the car, and which were now arriving with the insistent regularity of a thing that is decided to happen and will not be negotiated with. I gripped my mother's hand. I breathed the way Dara had taught me in for 4, out for 6, a rhythm that was supposed to manage pain, and actually manage nothing except giving my brain something to count, while my body did something extraordinary. The first hour passed in the blur that labor exists in. Not minutes, but waves, not time, but intensity. the world reduced to the space between contractions and the people in it. My mother was on my left, Dara was on my right. Dr. Kessler was at the foot of the bed, monitoring, checking, speaking in the calm medical vocabulary that means everything is fine, even when everything feels like it's ending. At 4:30 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Dara opened it, and Thomas walked in, not into the room, but to the doorway, where he stood with his hands at his sides and his eyes on me, and the particular helplessness of a man who wants to be useful and knows that the most useful thing he can do right now is stand still. "Can I stay?" he said. "I don't need to be close. I just want to be in the room." I looked at this man, my father-in-law, the father of the man who had left me, standing in a delivery room at 4:30 in the morning, asking permission to witness the birth of a granddaughter whose father had decided she wasn't worth staying for. "You can stay, Thomas," I said. He sat in the chair by the door. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He sat the way he did everything, quietly, structurally, and his presence filled the corner of the room, the way his presence had filled the corner of my house for 2 weeks. Not with noise, but with weight. The good kind. The kind that keeps a thing from blowing away. At 5:15, another knock. Nina. She had been in the waiting room, and she had apparently decided that waiting rooms were for people with patience, which was a quality Nina had never possessed and was not going to develop at 5:15 in the morning, while her sister was in labor. "I'm coming in," she said. "Not a question. I'll stand in the back. I'll be quiet. If you need me to leave, I'll leave, but I'm coming in." She came in. She was not quiet. She held my other hand, the one my mother wasn't holding, and she whispered a stream of Spanish that was half prayer and half profanity, and it was the most honest liturgy I had ever heard. At 6:22, another knock. Janelle from the clinic. She had flowers. She couldn't stay. She had a 7 a.m. patient, but she stood in the doorway and she said, "The whole clinic is awake. We're all watching our phones. You've got this, Tessa." And she left, and the flowers stayed, and the room smelled like lilies and antiseptic, which is the smell of life arriving in a place built for it. At 6:45, another knock. Adriana. She had driven through the night from the hotel she'd moved to when the house got too full. She was carrying coffee for everyone and a stuffed animal, a small bear in a yellow dress, the color of Duckling. She put it on the bedside table and she kissed my forehead and she said, "Lucia is going to be so loved," and her voice cracked on the word loved. And mine would have too if I hadn't been in the middle of a contraction that felt like the whole world was trying to fit through a door that was too small. At 7:03, one more knock. And this one I didn't expect. Mrs. Pack, 74 years old, standing in the doorway of a labor room at WakeMed Hospital in a floral housecoat and slippers, because apparently my mother had called her too, and apparently Mrs. Pack had gotten dressed and driven herself to the hospital at 6 in the morning because she believed that every baby deserves a welcome, and she intended to be part of it. "Mrs. Pack?" I said, half laughing, half crying, fully contracting. "You didn't have to come." "I knitted the blanket," she said. "I'm seeing it used." Dara looked at Dr. Kessler. Dr. Kessler looked at the room. My mother on one side, Nina on the other, Thomas in the corner, Adriana by the window, Mrs. Pack in the doorway, with slippers and conviction. And she smiled, the smile of a doctor who has delivered hundreds of babies and has never seen a room quite like this one. "We're at full capacity," Dr. Kessler said. "Fire marshal might have opinions." "The fire marshal isn't delivering this baby," Dara said. "I am. With you, and this room stays exactly as it is." At 7:41 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, in a room that was over capacity by at least 3 people and 1 stuffed bear, my daughter was born. She came into the world the way Moreno women come into everything, loudly, on her own terms, with a cry that filled the room, the way my mother's phone calls had filled my house 3 weeks earlier, completely, without apology, in a way that made the room better for it. Dr. Kessler placed her on my chest. Lucia, 6 pounds, 14 ounces, dark hair, dark eyes, the face of every woman in my family, compressed into a 6-pound package that fit perfectly against my heartbeat, and who opened her eyes and looked at me with an expression that I will remember when I remember nothing else, the expression of a person arriving in a world and finding it warm. The room was silent, the kind of silent that has sound in it. The sound of 6 people breathing, and 1 person crying, and 1 very small person discovering air for the first time. My mother's hand was on my shoulder. Nina was wiping her face. Thomas was standing now, standing at the foot of the bed, and his cheeks were wet, and he was looking at his granddaughter with the devastated tenderness of a man who was seeing both the best thing and the worst thing his family had ever produced in the same moment. And Mrs. Pack unfolded the duckling blanket and laid it gently over Lucia's back, and she said in a voice that was 74 years old and steady as a hand-knitted stitch, "Welcome, little one. Your room is full."
The first night home was the quietest loud I have ever experienced.
Lucia slept in 40-minute intervals, which is not sleeping, but rather a series of negotiations between a 6-pound human and the concept of consciousness. She would close her eyes, she would breathe, she would make a sound, not a cry, not yet, just a small announcement, like a notification from a device that doesn't know its own settings yet. And then the cry would come, and I would lift her, and she would find me, and the finding was enough to make the world stop hurting for exactly as long as she was against my chest.
My mother slept in the next room, not slept stationed. She was there the way a lighthouse is there, not moving but present. And every time I got up, she got up. And every time I sat in the rocking chair with Lucia at 3 a.m., she appeared in the doorway with a glass of water and stood there until I drank it and then disappeared without a word.
Thomas went home after 5 days. He had stayed for the birth, for the first nights, for the assembly of the last remaining piece of unbuilt furniture, a changing table that had arrived in a box the day Lucia was born, as if Amazon had coordinated the timing with my uterus. He built it in the nursery while Lucia slept on my chest in the rocking chair he'd brought from Wilmington. And when it was finished, he stood back and looked at the room, the crib he'd built, the changing table he'd built, the rocking chair he'd carried, the walls painted duckling, and he nodded the way men nod when they have put something into the world that will outlast them. "You call me," he said at the door, "for anything, 3 a.m., doesn't matter." "Thomas, I mean it. She's my granddaughter." He may have left, but I didn't. His voice caught on the word left, the way a coat catches on a nail, briefly, sharply, tearing something small. I didn't raise him to do this. I don't know where it came from, but it didn't come from me, and I'm not going to let it define what she knows about this family. He hugged me, the first time he'd ever hugged me. Not the sidearm pat of holidays, but a real hug, the kind that means I am here, and I am sorry, and I will carry what I can. Then he drove back to Wilmington with an empty truck and a phone full of photographs of a granddaughter who had his jawline and her mother's eyes and a father-shaped hole in her life that he was quietly, steadily trying to fill with peaches and rocking chairs and the stubborn refusal to leave. Nina stayed for 2 weeks. She was terrible at being quiet and excellent at being present, which turned out to be more important. She sang to Lucia in Spanish, songs our grandmother had sung to us, songs about the moon and the river and a bird that flies home even when the wind is wrong. She burned dinner twice. She reorganized the pantry in a way that made no sense and that I kept, because the chaos of it felt like love. Dara came every day after her shift. She checked Lucia's weight, her latch, her color. She checked me, not as a nurse, but as a friend, sitting on the bathroom floor while I cried in the shower. Not because I was sad, but because my body had done an extraordinary thing and was now processing the bill. And the bill included hormones and exhaustion, and the specific grief of holding your daughter for the first time and wishing the person who helped create her could see how perfect she was. Michael called on day 9. I was in the nursery. Lucia was asleep on my chest. The rocking chair was moving in the rhythm that had become my heartbeat, back and forth, the metronomic pulse of a woman who has learned that motion is the only thing that keeps a newborn settled and a broken heart functional. His name appeared on my phone. I looked at it. I let it ring. Not out of anger. I had moved past anger, the way you move past a town on a highway, aware of its existence but no longer in it. I let it ring because the woman holding this baby was not the woman he had left. That woman had been 37 weeks pregnant and sleeping on her left side and waiting for a man who was already gone. This woman had given birth in a room full of people who chose to be there, and she had a daughter on her chest and a mother in the next room, and a father-in-law who drove 6 hours with peaches, and she did not need a phone call from a man who had written, "I'll call when I'm ready" on a pillow and expected the world to wait. The phone stopped ringing. A voicemail appeared. I didn't play it, not that night. I played it 3 days later, in the kitchen, at noon, while Lucia napped, and my mother washed dishes, and the house hummed with the ordinary machinery of a life that had been rebuilt in 5 weeks by people who refused to let it stay broken. His voice was smaller than I remembered, not the voice of a man who was drowning, the voice of a man who had surfaced and found the shore empty, and was only now understanding that shores don't wait. Tessa, I heard she was born. My dad told me. He sent me a picture. She's a long pause. The sound of a man trying to find a word big enough for what he's feeling and discovering that such a word doesn't exist. She's beautiful. She looks like you. I know I don't have the right to say that. I know I don't have the right to say anything. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. And I want to come home. If you'll let me. I want to meet her. The voicemail ended. I set the phone on the counter. My mother did not turn around from the dishes, but her hands stopped moving for exactly 2 seconds, the length of time it takes a mother to hear a sentence, process its weight, and decide whether to speak or let her daughter find her own words. I found my own words. They took 3 days. I called him on a Saturday. Lucia was 12 days old. She was in the bouncer on the kitchen floor watching the ceiling fan with the fascination of a person who has just discovered circles. And I sat on the floor beside her and I called the man who had left us. And I said, "You can meet her, but I need you to understand something first. Anything." "You left because you weren't ready to be a father. I hear you. I believe you. I'm not going to punish you for being honest about something most men lie about." I paused, but while you were figuring out who you are, I was giving birth. In a room that was full, Michael. Not full of you. Full of every person you left behind when you walked out that door. Your father built her crib. Nina assembled her stroller. Dara replaced your name on my emergency contact. Mrs. Pack, the neighbor you never bothered to learn the name of, knitted her blanket and showed up to the hospital in slippers at 6 a.m. because she believed every baby deserves a welcome. He was quiet. The kind of quiet that used to be his whole personality, and was now just the sound of a man with nothing adequate to say. "You can meet your daughter," I said. "You can hold her. You can be in her life if you choose to be. Really choose. Not the kind of choosing that lasts until you feel like you're drowning again. But you don't get to come home. Not today. Maybe not ever. Because home isn't a place you get to leave and come back to when you're ready. Home is the people who stayed, and you weren't one of them." He came the next day, Sunday. He sat in the rocking chair his father had brought, and I placed Lucia in his arms, and he looked at her, really looked, the way he should have looked at the ultrasound, the way he should have looked at the nursery, the way he should have looked at me, and he cried. Not the decorative kind, the kind that starts in a place you didn't know you had, and comes out sounding like an apology that knows it isn't enough.
"She has my nose," he whispered.
"She has your father's," I said. "Your father, who was in the delivery room, in the chair you should have been in." He flinched. Small. The flinch of a man hearing a truth that fits exactly where it's aimed. "I'm going to earn this," he said. "I don't know how, but I'm going to earn this. You're going to have to." He held her for 45 minutes. He left. He came back the next day, and the next, and the next. He didn't move back in. I didn't ask him to. What we built instead was something slower. Something without a name, not a marriage, not a separation, but a careful, deliberate architecture of presence, assembled one visit at a time, the way his father had assembled furniture, with patience and without instructions, and with the understanding that the thing being built was too important to rush. Thomas came back every month. He brought peaches when they were in season, and oranges when they weren't. Lucia learned to crawl on the rug he bought for the nursery. She said her first word, abuela, in my mother's arms, which was correct because my mother had earned it more than anyone. Mrs. Pack knitted a second blanket. A third. She started a collection. Lucia's crib looked like a yarn shop had exploded inside it, in every color, because Mrs. Pack believed that a baby could never have too many blankets and that warmth was not a thing you could overdo. And every night, after the last feeding, after the last diaper, after the house went quiet and the ceiling fan turned in the dark, and Lucia breathed her small, steady breath in the crib her grandfather built, I sat in the rocking chair and I thought about a room at Wake Med Hospital, full of people, full of flowers, full of a 74-year-old woman in slippers, and a father-in-law who drove 6 hours with peaches, and a sister who cursed in Spanish, and a best friend who broke HR policy because love is more important than paperwork. And I understood, finally, what my grandmother meant when she said the ones who leave were never holding you. They were leaning. Michael was leaning. The room was holding. Here's what I know after all of it. A man can leave. A man can write a note and fold it and place it on a pillow and drive away from a life he built and a woman he promised and a daughter he hasn't met. A man can do all of that, and it will hurt, and the hurt is real, and I am not going to pretend it isn't. But a room can fill. That's the other truth. The one nobody tells you when the pillow is empty and the nursery is quiet and the note says, I'm not ready. A room can fill with people who are ready. People who drive 6 hours with peaches. People who pull your file and change your emergency contact. People who knit blankets in the color of your nursery and show up at 6 a.m. in slippers because they believe every baby deserves a welcome. My name is Tessa Moreno. My husband left me 3 weeks before our baby was due. He said he wasn't ready. The delivery room was full anyway, and every single person in it was ready.